My main skepticism comes around heaven and hell.
Mm-hmm.
What does the afterlife mean to you? What happens when you die and after you die?
We believe that once you die, you have kept your relational existence an opportunity to keep relationships going forward. You're not going to be some type of spiritual, just kind of aloof being that's ethereal, strumming a harp on a cloud. Oftentimes other religions say that's exactly what you are, or somehow you just get caught up in an all soul type of existence and you lose your individuality. We believe that you keep your individuality, and Jesus actually died physically with a body and rose physically. So we're going to have physical lasting existence. That's why Steve Jobs, when he said finally on his deathbed, he finally started to really grapple with these questions that you were talking about, because he didn't really grapple with them much during his life. He kind of just waited off and said, purpose is to make money here and to create. Well, eventually when he was on his deathbed, he said, hold on here. All my experience, all my relational experience, as well as my wealth and what I've done with my businesses, I don't think this is just going to go away with the click of a mouse. I think there's got to be something more. And he would call that heaven. So it's a relational existence where we'll be able to recognize each other if we accept Christ, versus something that is either you just fall through a trapdoor into darkness, or you just get caught up in an all soul, or something like it.
And then what about hell? Like how is hell depicted? Because that for me is a very interesting one. It sounds illogical, or at least not intuitive, that someone can exist not well for a life that's maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years long, and sin and not ask for forgiveness, and then for eternity be banished to hell. What is hell depicted like? What is the general understanding?
Well, sin doesn't send you to hell. It's what you do with Jesus Christ. What do you do with God? Are you going to live for yourself? So David Foster Wallace, you guys probably know him. He wrote Infinite Jest, was probably going to be the greatest writer of our era. Atheist, he said, everybody worships something. If it's something that is ultimately infinite, it can buoy you in a way where you can make it through suffering. But if it's something that is like looks, talent, money, that's all going to fade away, and eventually it'll eat you alive. And so he pointed to a type of heaven and hell he ultimately didn't believe, but he said it makes a lot of sense. And so for us, we say all these kids on college campuses, back to your question a second ago, these kids on college campuses believe in a heaven and hell typically, and there's a growing belief in hell specifically because they want justice. Justice is intimately connected with hell, infinitely. Because if you don't have hell, there's no judgment day, and ultimately endless amounts of people are going to be ripped off. And there's no justice from a moral, objective perspective either, if there is no God.
So what's the primary judgment then? Basically, like you said, if you believed in Christ.
Yeah, if you decide, I'm going to give up myself to gain myself, if I'm going to live for something outside of myself and say, I'm going to humble myself in order to say, God, I want to live for you rather than me. Now you're moving in that direction versus living for something else.
I agree. That's probably a moral statement to live for something more than just yourself. So I agree with that. But you could also live for your children. You could live for the community, other things that sure the text would support. But technically, if you're also morally not living for yourself, you're doing something just, and therefore you probably, should get into the gates, right?
Well, again, it's what do you do with Jesus Christ? Because if you live for children or if you live for community, I mean, if one of my kids dies and I'm living for them and I turn them into God, I'm going to have an existential breakdown. Jordan Peterson talks about that. You guys had him on your show.
Mm-hmm.
He flat out said that. If I'm living for a parent or a kid, I will have an emotional, existential, total breakdown, and I will be depressed significantly the rest of my life if I turn them into a God, rather than something that is infinite and personal. Endless amounts of people say this. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. He said people were literally shriveling up and dying, or they were becoming tremendously selfish if they did not believe in a God outside of the prisoner of war camps. So if you live for something that's finite, it's going to destroy you eventually.
But why do they need to live for Jesus in particular, not maybe another God?
Mm-hmm.
For like any other religion out there, would they go to hell?
Right. And so the question becomes, who are we to judge hearts? We are not universalists in saying that any religion, it doesn't matter what you are, you're going to heaven if you follow it sincerely. No, it's not about how sincere your belief is. It's about the object of your faith. And is there evidence for the reliability of that object or not? Is it just, oh no, I'm going to be sincere. This is my religion that I grew up in, and that's what I'm going to follow. Versus the evidence for, no, every single person, like he just said, every single person is going to ask those big questions at some point. Leo Tolstoy, when he was at the very apex of his writing career, everybody knew him in the world, had an existential breakdown because he said, wow, I'm going to die one day, and all these books that I'm writing, all this money that I'm accruing, doesn't really matter whatsoever. So he has this breakdown. So the question becomes, back to my dad's original point, who or what is more reliable than Jesus Christ and who you're living for? So you have to do your research, but we don't believe that if you don't have just the knowledge, God's going to send you to hell. So it's not just a knowledge thing. It's how do you live out your life as well? Am I living in such a way where I am humbling myself and getting outside of myself, or am I living for something like money or something related to money?
The logic of heaven and hell, part of it is, if there is no God, if there is no day of judgment, if there is no heaven and no hell, you've got to think, okay, then what is there? And I think it's rather obvious. There's the fertilizer pit for Adolf Hitler and Mother Teresa. And if you believe that, then what does that mean about life today? What it means about life today is it doesn't matter whether you're Adolf Hitler or Mother Teresa, because ultimately you're going to end in the same place, the fertilizer pit. So part of the logic of a day of judgment and a heaven and a hell is, no, it does matter. God created us for a purpose. And if you choose to violate the purpose for which God created you by living a life of Adolf Hitler, you will be judged for that, and that'll be hell. And then the second point is, hell is a result of me choosing to live my life separate from God. It's not a result of ignorance. It's a result of me choosing to say, God, I have a better way. I want to live separate from you.
So it's an active choice.
Correct.
So you can't, in theory, I know you guys have addressed this before, but you can't be born into a culture that doesn't have any like Christian values, or you couldn't be a person that, you're born and then 1 year later you fall sick and you die or something like that. Those people did not make the active decision to stay away
Very good.
from the church. So they can still go into heaven.
And that's biblical too. Yeah. When David messes up, has the adulterous affair with Bathsheba, and obviously a baby is born out of tremendous sin. It's an adultery, and there was murder because he sent Mariah to the front lines and Mariah was killed. He specifically says, I will go to that baby will not come to me.
So in my circumstance, I know you guys don't know because you're not guarding the gates, but if I don't necessarily reject Christ, which I don't, but if I just live my life as what I like to think of as a pretty good man, and I do have principles that align with the values of Christianity, and I try to help people and contribute to my community and be a good father eventually and a good husband, then would that be sufficient?
No, it won't be sufficient. Because I'm like you, Jack. You and I are two great guys. We haven't murdered anybody. We've never stolen a bunch of money out of a bank or from a person's wallet. We're really decent guys. But unfortunately for us, the standard on the day of judgment is not going to be good American citizen. It's going to be God's holiness, his moral perfection. And although I have never stolen money, I've been greedy. Although I've never murdered, I have hated. So I'm not this wonderful guy that I wish you both from Las Vegas would believe that I am. All right? I am a dirty, rotten sinner. Now, religion says, if you follow the rules, you'll make it to heaven. And Jesus Christ says, no, you'll never make it because of you following the rules. Because although you follow many of the rules and you live a good life and your conscience tells you live a good life and your rational mind tells you live a good life, you also experience guilt. And guilt is my alarm system, God says, of waking you up to the fact that you haven't always done good. And that's where the cross of Christ comes in. He bleeds and dies on a cross to forgive us for our wrongdoing, to reconcile us to God.
But even right now, I'm not, like I said, rejecting Christianity. I'm just existing and not like making that active decision. Isn't there some sort of distinction between the two of like someone presents me with it and I'm completely like, no, never talk to me about it ever. Or they give me the facts and maybe it's enough evidence to support that it's true, but I still reject the facts and the evidence. Wouldn't that be more rejecting Christianity than simply existing through life? And, as we discussed before, and sure, I'm a sinner, but there is, sinning comes in different, it comes on a spectrum.
Yes, it does come on a spectrum. But Jack, if I say, hello, Jack, and then I turn my back to you and I ignore you, that's a form of rejection. And so if I sort of give tacit acknowledgement to the existence of God but don't take him seriously, that's a form of tacit rejection. I'm essentially rejecting him. No, if you treat me with kindness, then it's incumbent upon me to respond to your kindness and to trust you and to love you and build a friendship, build a relationship with you. And when you're confronted by Jesus Christ, who gives his life for you, I don't think there are a lot of people who've given their lives for me. When he gives his life for me on a cross, then all of a sudden it's incumbent upon me to respond to him.
Well, couldn't you also argue that people give their lives when they go and they volunteer for the military or they join or they fight for our freedom, that they also give their lives for us?
Great point, Graham. They sure do. In fact, just this past week, I was with a guy who's a sniper in the armed forces. And what he has put himself through and what he is opening himself up to is incredible. He fought in Afghanistan, he fought in Iraq, and believe me, I thanked him for his service to our country. But it goes beyond that. It goes to, God, do you really care for me? Do you really want me to spend eternity with you in heaven? Whoa, if you do, I've got to respond to you and trust in you. And ultimately, Graham, you and I are going to trust someone or something. If I don't trust God ultimately, I will trust myself ultimately. Mm-hmm. For instance, when I read the Bible and I say, well, I don't like that part of the Bible and I don't accept that. What I'm saying is my judgment, my impulses, my feelings are more important. I trust them more than I trust what God has said, supposedly, in this book, the Bible. In other words, if I don't worship God, probably as an American, I'm going to worship an idealized version of myself.